the conversation. Tell us what you think in the comment section. And please like and share our videos with your friends and family. The next broadcast will start shortly. If you care about South Africa and want to make a positive difference, then join the DA. Visit our website at da.org.za for more information. Find out who represents you in your ward and district and who are the DA mayors working for you in your town or city, and which MPs represent you and your causes in Parliament. On our website, you can learn more about our latest campaigns and how you can get involved. Join the Democratic Alliance to rescue South Africa. Become an activist, become a councillor, become a member of Parliament if you care about South Africa. Please visit donate.da.org.za. Donate to a cause you believe in. Donate to make a difference. Did you know the DA is the second biggest party in South Africa, making the DA the official opposition? By getting the basics right, delivering better services, and having zero tolerance for corruption. This is the DA difference. The next broadcast will start shortly. Follow us on social media for the latest in news and politics in South Africa. Like and follow our page on Facebook. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on anything. Be part of the conversation. Tell us what you think in the comment section. And please like and share our videos with your friends and family. The next broadcast will start shortly.
I now would like to hand over to our federal leader, John Steenhuisen. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Bridget, and good morning to all members of the media and for those who are watching online. Today, the Democratic Alliance will be announcing the next steps that we'll be taking in terms of the Cadre deployment minute saga. You will be well aware that this has been a long-fought battle by the Democratic Alliance to obtain these Cadre deployment records, because we fundamentally believe that they would demonstrate the very, very clear blurring of the line between party and state, and that Cadre deployment has infected every single level of government and every sphere of government, and has had really awful consequences for the country. The fact that we sit now currently with load shedding is as a result of Cadre deployment. The fact that we sit with ports and harbours that don't work is as a result of that. When factories close and people lose their jobs, it can be traced back to this policy. So we'll be announcing today the steps that we'll be taking as part of this ongoing campaign against Cadre deployment corruption. And using the precedent created in our recent court victory in the Constitutional Court, we are going to be launching a contempt of court application against the ANC to obtain the copies of emails and WhatsApps that are relevant to the period when President Ramaphosa served as chairman of the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee between 2013 and 2018, which we know from past experience and from the Zondo Commission was the height of the state capture process. We will also today be filing an application for leave to appeal the North Gauteng High Court judgment that was handed down on Tuesday. The ANC failed to include President Ramaphosa's own emails and WhatsApps in the material that it handed over to the DA, despite the fact that Mr. Ramaphosa was the chairman of this committee during this period and was one of the recipients of the emails and WhatsApp messages in question. He ultimately bears responsibility for the operations of this committee, but has failed to depose an affidavit confirming he has no documents or information for this period, instead choosing to rely on the dog ate my homework approach. The DAs yesterday issued a letter of demand to the African National Congress for it to fully comply with the Constitutional Court's order with a deadline of tomorrow. If they do not adhere to this demand, we are going to be seeking a contempt of court ruling that includes prison time, aimed specifically at the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, who has acted on behalf of the ANC in this matter. We will use the precedent created by the case of Jacob Zuma when he was sent to prison for similarly being in contempt of a constitutional court order. And finally, we will be pursuing criminal charges against ANC officials involved in the destruction of information as part of the blatant cover-up campaign to try and wipe President Ramaphosa's fingerprints off of the Cadre deployment records. In our legal letter sent to the ANC yesterday, the DAs pointed out that the ANC has failed to comply with the court order in a number of material respects. One, extensively redacting the documents. Two, providing no information for a 5-year period during of which Mr. Ramaphosa was the chairman. They've also failed to provide a list of all decisions taken by the Cadre Deployment Committee as ordered by the court. They've impermissibly restricted communication disseminated during the year 2020. They've furnished illegible documents. They've destroyed documents while the matter was pending before the court. They've failed to adequately explain the steps taken to locate the information, including all information from President Ramaphosa himself as the chairperson of the committee, and thus a recipient of any and all information and documents pertaining to it. And they failed to provide minutes that were not formally adopted, even though the court order obliges the party to hand over all of this relevant documentation. I'm now going to, after announcing these steps, hand over to Dr. Leon Schreiber to take us through what has emerged from these current minutes and why it is absolutely essential that we seek access to the things that are very clearly being deliberately hidden from the public and from ourselves in what we regard as a violation of the Constitutional Court's order. Leon?
Thank you very much, John, Bridget, and good morning to everyone here today and following the proceedings. I would like to briefly talk to you about what we have found in these records. I'd like to express my appreciation to the media for the work that they have done in also going through 1,300 pages of these records, but I do want to share our sense of what's in this. The first thing is that these records, 1,300 pages of them, reveal to us how ANC Cadre deployment works. The ANC controls both the demand side and the supply side of senior administrative roles, positions at SOEs, boards, entities, and independent state institutions. On the supply side, it interferes by having built a database of loyal ANC cadres who are ready to take up powerful positions in the state as they become available. The cadres apply to the deployment committee that sits at Luthuli House in Johannesburg for inclusion on the cadre database. Their abridged CVs are uploaded to a file called database list. They are then each assigned a database list number ready to be deployed on decision of the committee. On the other hand, the ANC then similarly manipulates the demand side of appointments. No government department, SOE, parastatal, board or entity may advertise its vacancies before the ANC Deployment Committee decides who from among the list are favoured for those particular roles. The cadre records are littered with very specific commands to ministers in the cabinet as well as to the president himself, that no adverts may go out until the ANC has chosen their preferred cadre for the job. Failure to adhere to this system leads to threats and actions of sanction. Just on this database list, a critical finding that we've made. It contains hundreds of names and in many ways is one of the big smoking guns out of these records. The database essentially works like Take-A-Lot for ANC cadres. When a vacancy arises, the committee will pick a name from the list and on they go for delivery into high-paying government positions. In ranking the database critically, the Cadre Deployment Committee considers loyalty to the ANC as the #1 criterion. In fact, there is even a ranking of loyalty that determines how soon a cadre could be deployed to an influential role. At the top of the list is something that they call a true cadre of the movement, an ANC member and long-standing activist. The database list that we have in our possession is seemingly out of date, but it has 46 persons at the highest rank, true cadre of the movement. When a position is to be filled, but no true cadres of the movement are available for that role, next in the ranking would be an ordinary ANC member. The committee often, as you can see from WhatsApps, the parts of it that are not redacted, scramble to find appropriate people. If no ANC members are available, the third position on the ranking would see the committee then look at ANC supporters or known sympathizers. And finally, right at the bottom of the list, despite the need for skills experience, and excellence in the public administration, only then would a person who is classified as a non-ANC member be considered. This ranking based on loyalty to the party ensures that ANC people are always preferred above skilled but non-political applicants. It can best be summarized in the following sentence. The ANC has created a system to ensure the best position for every ANC cadre, but not the best person for every position. Then we have also found the extent of cadre deployment across the state. Here are a couple of examples. State-owned enterprises, we all know from the Zondo Commission, was a scene of state capture, and the Commission identified cadre deployment as one of the driving factors and mechanisms behind state capture. Yet, despite the Zondo Commission's findings, the ANC's Deployment Committee is still actively pursuing this discredited practice. And just yesterday, we saw the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula defending the practice on live television. In a 3-year period between 2018 and 2020, the Deployment Committee directly interfered on 12 separate occasions in the appointment of SOE boards and CEOs. These include Transnet, which, as we currently speak, has been paralyzed by infighting within the ANC Cadre Deployment Committee about the person who should be deployed to this critical state-owned enterprise that is causing very substantial damage to our economy. The committee interfered with Denel's board appointments in 2018. It interfered with the South African Post Office and executive appointments at the Post Office in 2019 and 2020. In January 2020, it interfered with the appointment of the CEO of Arms Corps. In September 2020, it interfered with the appointment of the board of Arms Corps. Between 2019 and 2020, it interfered with PRASA's board appointments. In November 2020, they interfered with the ESCOM board, and in November 2020 with the SAA board. The same goes for water boards, an escalating crisis in South Africa, where we are now starting to see water shedding of the same scale that we have become sadly too used to when it comes to load shedding. Since 2018, the Deployment Committee interfered with the following water boards and entities. In 2019, it interfered with the appointment of a Rand Water CEO. It interfered with appointments to boards of Nkomati, Bloemfontein, Transcaledon, Overberg, and Magaliesberg Water. In May 2020, it interfered with the interim boards of Lepelle Northern, Magalies, and Sedibeng Water. In 2021 and 2020, it interfered with the appointment of the Amatole Water Board. It was in fact actively involved in the recruitment and appointments of people to the Amatole Water Board. It doesn't end with state-owned enterprises and nominally independent institutions. The same goes for government departments and critically the directors general who lead these departments. Between 2018 and 2020, the Deployment Committee repeatedly took charge of the process to appoint DGs across government departments. Again, this is despite the fact that the Zondo Commission had found that the deployment policy was counter to the values of a professional and independent civil service as envisioned in the Constitution. The consequences are clear. Over the past year alone, wasteful expenditure to the value of 40 billion rand has been incurred by ANC national departments under the control of the Directors General deployed through the Cadre Deployment Committee. I will briefly list for you the departments affected. In October 2019, the Director General for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. In January 2020, the committee interfered with the Director General and Head of the National School of Governance. In March 2020, the DG of COCTA. In May 2020, the DG of the Government Communications and Information Service. In June 2020, the DG again for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. July 2020, the DG for Justice and Constitutional Development. August 2020, again, the DG for COCTA. August 2020, the DG for Military Veterans and the Department of Defense. In August 2020, the DG for Communications and Digital Technologies. In the same month, the DG for Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fisheries. In October 2020, the DG for Constitutional Development, interfered with by a political party. In November 2020, again the DG for Communications, and finally, in the same year, the Director General of Home Affairs. In addition to the sheer extent of interference in public sector appointments, the records also reveal the following smoking gun instances of serious transgressions. Firstly, the President of the Republic is summoned to appear before the committee on the 26th of June 2020. He is minuted as being fully aware of committee processes, and he apologizes to the committee for using his constitutional powers to make an appointment without getting direction from the Cadre Deployment Committee first. Secondly, the committee chastises a minister for not completing the committee process before advertising senior vacancies on the 20th of January 2020. The minister is admonished and urged to bring vacancies to the committee before advertising them. That is a critical piece of the puzzle because it shows that long before any other person is even able to apply or to be aware of a position, the ANC is already running its secret process. Thirdly, 4 candidates for the position of Director General in the COGTA department had to make presentations to the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee before shortlisting began on the 13th of April 2020. This is a flagrant hijacking of the legal powers to make appointments, to summon candidates to make presentations to a political party's deployment committee. The fourth case is when a Director General is in fact chosen by the Deployment Committee before the official process commenced. This is in the minutes of the 14th of October 2019. And the committee then decides that the DG that is appointed can be outside the list of applicants. Fifth, a minister in the presidency writes to the ANC Deployment Committee on ministerial letterhead to plead with the committee to support the candidates which emerge from the process in Parliament to appoint members of the ICASA board. The date is redacted, but it occurred before August 2020. Here we see direct interference in the operations of Parliament. Appointment powers vested in Parliament to decide on who should be on the board, but then permission is begged from the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee. 6. The Secretary General writes to all deployed comrades that all vacancies must be reported to the ANC before being advertised. For ANC cadres on the database to apply first. No appointment may go to Cabinet without committee approval. Once again, that demonstrates both the supply and the demand side of cadre deployment. There is a database list, and before a process may commence, the people on that database list must be given the inside track according to the Deployment Committee. Finally, and very tellingly, after the DA started fighting back hard on this issue, the committee notes that it has become, quote, hesitant about putting things into writing. That is said in a WhatsApp on the 17th of August 2020. I conclude by outlining information that is missing from these records. As Mr. Steenhuisen announced, if the ANC does not fill in these critical gaps by tomorrow, the DA will take them back for contempt of court, and we will pursue prison time for Fikile Mbalula. The minutes that are missing, we can deduce from the files in our possession, are all minutes prior to 2018, which coincidentally happens to be when President Ramaphosa was the chairman of this committee. He has not furnished any of his emails or any of his WhatsApps. Minutes are also missing for the 21st of May 2018, for the 6th of August 2018, for the period of March to August 2019, for a meeting on the 12th of November 2019, and another meeting on the 16th of June 2020. We can only speculate about what could possibly be in those minutes, but clearly the ANC is determined to hide them in contravention of a court order. Next, redactions are all over these documents. There are WhatsApps included that are unreadable without names or numbers. There are emails supplied, but they don't include the attachments they refer to. And names were deliberately, apparently, removed from the database list of cadres available for deployment. The pervasive redactions on crucial documents hinder our complete understanding as the public, and the DA calls for transparency in this process. Despite opposing us in court for 3 years, Fikile Mbalula yesterday suddenly claimed that the ANC has discovered a love for transparency. I conclude by pointing to this. WhatsApp messages from the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee WhatsApp group. And I simply ask you, does this look like transparency to you? Does this look like compliance with the Constitutional Court's order? I think not. I now hand back to Mr. Steenhuisen.
Thank you very much, Leon, for that. I want to start by dealing with the panicked accusations made by the ANC and their proxies yesterday. It is clear that the DA's success now in exposing their dirty cadre deployment secrets is causing major political damage to the ANC. After trying to ignore this issue and prevent us access to it, the ANC has obviously suddenly woken up to the idea that the general public out there, just like the DA, abhors cadre deployment and is fed up with cadre deployment and the effect that it has had on our economy and in our politics in South Africa. So they've now resorted to projection by trying to accuse the DA of the very thing that they are guilty of, in a classic bait and switch exercise, which unfortunately some in the media seem to have fallen for hook, line and sinker. The whataboutery that they're attempting is frankly the last refuge of the scoundrel. So let me set the record straight and let me set it clear. Unlike the ANC, there is and never will be a cadre deployment committee in the DA. Unlike the ANC, there is no DA cadre deployment WhatsApp group that interferes with public appointments. Unlike the ANC, there exists no database in the DA of people who are to be favoured for public appointments. And unlike the ANC, the DA does not compile a shortlist of favoured candidates or instruct political office bearers on who they should appoint. Before I became the leader of the Democratic Alliance, the DA's federal executive requested mayors to inform it when making some top-level appointments, precisely to ensure that there was no deviation from the recommendations of independent selection panels and to prevent any type of cronyism from taking place. This was done precisely to ensure merit-based appointments in the context that was created by the 2016 local government elections, when the FedEx realized how vulnerable appointments in coalition governments were to manipulation by, most notably, the EFF and other parties. This brings me now to the old letter by Anton Bredell that the ANC has dishonestly twisted and which Cameron Dogmore brings every year to SONA to try and create some moral equivocation. I would encourage members of the media and the public to read the letter to the end. Because if you see that letter in its full context, not the small portion the ANC wants you to read, it asks precisely why there was a deviation from the unanimous recommendation of the independent selection panel. The ANC has also maliciously and dishonestly chosen to mistranslate the word, the Afrikaans word, keuringspaneel, which means selection panel, to the cadre deployment committee. Any person who's in possession of an Afrikaans dictionary will be able to determine what clearly the difference is between a keuringspaneel and a cadre deployment committee. This constituted a blatant lie to cover up the fact that the reality is that this letter was written precisely to prevent the appointment of an unqualified individual who was not the first choice of the independent selection panel. Nonetheless, shortly after I was elected as the DA leader in 2020, I asked FedEx to do away with this provision, that it should even be informed of these appointments. And this was designed and done precisely to avoid the further abuse of any such future abuse of any of the provisions, as well as to prevent the type of deliberate misinformation that we now see with Bredell's letter. The truth is simple. Unlike the ANC, the DA has never and will never subvert legal appointment processes. And our proud track record of good, clean, accountable government is built precisely on our rejection of cadre deployment. The proof is in the pudding. And the clean audits, clean governance that's delivered in DA-run municipalities is the best proof that people need. So despite the ANC's best efforts to try and bait and switch and to try and change the conversation because it doesn't suit them, we will not be distracted from our continuing fight against cadre deployment. And in concluding today's announcement, and before you ask questions, I would like you to have a look at the easel alongside me, because there's a very, very clear distinction that clearly some do not understand. On the top side of the easel, you will see lawful political appointments that are allowed to be made by politicians. These are all linked to the term of the office bearer concerned. If that person leaves office, those people leave along with them. This is a practice that happens the world over. And I notice with interest the ANC's attempts to now try and portray some appointments that were made in terms of these provisions to try and pass them off as what are the clear guidelines about how civil servants should be appointed. So, where you see this section here, it is improper for politicians to interfere in the appointment of those positions. And I would ask the media, when they're confronted with the bait and switch operation, to bear in mind this clear distinction, where the political office bearer appointments begin, but also where they end. These people leave when the political person leaves the office. These people remain employed for time immemorial in the civil service and become part of the public service. This is where cadre deployment has infected the South African environment. This is where the boards have been hollowed out. This is why the electricity is off. This is why our ports and harbours don't work. This is why we have a situation where our economy is tanking. And this is why getting even the most basic things done are impossible. Voters can remove these people every 5 years in an election. Once deployed into the civil service, voters can never remove these individuals, and they remain free to carry on infecting the public service like a cancer with their corruption, maladministration, and ill deeds. And I would hope that in the questions you'll be able to distinguish between these two categories. Let me just say that the missing minutes, the missing laptops, are unfathomable and clearly designed as a cover-up to prevent Cyril Ramaphosa's fingerprints from being exposed in this. The missing laptops, the missing minutes, the missing WhatsApps from the president's own personal devices are simply incongruent with the way in which the modern world works, with cloud computing and with computer backups on devices. It's not good enough that you say, well, I couldn't find the emails from the computer they were sent, but you've made no effort to try and obtain those records from the people to whom they were sent. And that is where the missing thing is here. We need to absolutely make sure that that people understand that if we want to end cadre deployment, the best way to do so is by voting the ANC out on the 29th of May and making sure that we can end this once and for all. Because we have made a commitment that if we become part of a new government, we will table within the first 100 days the end cadre deployment bill, which will end this practice forever, no matter which party is in power. Secondly, I would remind South Africans that they have till midnight this evening to register to vote. So if you've not yet registered to vote, please get online now so that you can help us put a silver bullet right through the heart of this terrible practice of cadre deployment and end it once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, John and Leon. We are very committed to the principles of justice, transparency, and a government that truly serves the people of South Africa. Your work in disseminating this information is very critical and crucial for the democratic process. We are now going to open the floor for questions. If I could ask that before you ask a question, you give us your name and the media house from which you have been brought here, and so that we can just know who is in the room and then answer your questions as such. We will have 3 sets of questions if it gets to that, and then we will be closing the conference. So I would like to take questions, please. Yes.
Christian Du Plessis from Netwerk 24. So my first question is related to the High Court's judgment. In that judgment, it was said that there is no problem with parties influencing government decisions and that this is not the same as interference. So my question is, what makes the DA so certain that the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee interfered with appointments as opposed to just making recommendations? And secondly, Bongani Boloy, the former mayor of Midvaal, said that the FedEx had to approve all appointments at senior positions in municipalities. Would you just comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. The next question.
Jan Gerber, News 24.
Yes.
Would the DA release the FedEx minutes for the period when appointments were discussed? And if so, can I have them?
Okay. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Joseph Mosia, SABC.
Okay.
Will the DA say with certainty that no HOD in the province or a municipal manager in any of its councils is a party member of the DA, first of all?
Right.
And secondly, is that ANC not just guilty of being foolish in actually having a deployment committee, whereas the DA, as you say, does not have such a committee and has no minutes to be revealed. And as a result, the DA cannot be found like the ANC to have actually, because we have examples. I can make an example of somebody that I would like you to explain to me why that is not cadre deployment, how Mr. Tim Harris ended up at Westcrow in the first place.
Right.
Hi, thank you. Babalon Dancer from Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News.
Just 2 questions following up on the questions regarding the former Midvaal mayor, who, as yesterday, Musa Maimane was also on the radio to respond to comments that were made that when he was leader of the DA, there was, whether unofficially, because there is no deployment committee in the DA, that a similar practice was being, put in play. And he was responding to that. And another question, John mentioned that there are no fingerprints of the president in the minutes. They seem to have been, wiped off by the ANC. Whose fingerprints are in these minutes mostly? Could you just give us a few names? Who are the ANC officials who are basically in these minutes that you can identify?
Great. Shall we take those and then we'll continue? Thanks.
Thanks, Babala. I'm going to start with you, but I want to ask that you give me a moment to just pull it up. Just 1 second. So what we see in the minutes is that they start every meeting by recording attendance, and that gives us a good indication of who's actually present. So as you know, the practice is that the deputy president is the chair of the committee. So for example, here we have one from shortly after Mr. Ramaphosa became president. This is from the 11th of May 2018. You can see the chair here is David Mabuza, of course, who was the deputy then. And then you have Jesse Duarte, who was the coordinator at the time. Then you have the following members: Sedumo Dlamini, Mildred Olifant, Sifiso Buthelezi, Susan Shabangu, Natso Kumalo, Shumbuzo Mpanza, Soli Petwe, Mwekho Matuba, and there's an apology from Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. So it indicates to you some of these members of the Deployment Committee, and they put it in brackets, are members of the ANC Youth League. There's a person from Sanko. There's a person from Kusatu, Soli Petwe, and a person from the ANC Women's League. So you can see that there's representation from across the party. It does fluctuate a bit, I suppose, determining on membership at the time, but you can always be sure that the Deputy President is the chair, and it appears that the practice is for the Deputy Secretary General to be the coordinator or the secretary. So that's what we have in terms of those particular names, and we can easily deduce during President Ramaphosa's time he would have been listed as chair in these same minutes. The other thing I would like to address, Christian, your question about what's the distinction essentially between interference and influence. And there's a very important line in the court judgment, and as Mr. Steenhuisen has indicated, we've just finalized our papers, so we will be appealing partly on this basis, because it speaks about a bright line of separation between party and state that must be upheld. And our view is, if you pay proper attention to the minutes, that is really the smoking gun here. This is not speculation, it's not conjecture. Read the minutes and you see even a single example where a minister is told, do not make the appointment now. Let's just leave it at that. Even if it is just at the instruction of the Cadre Deployment Committee to postpone an appointment. That constitutes administrative action. That constitutes an interference in a decision of the minister, because even in that benign case, it will delay the appointment. But then, obviously, if you go through the minutes, it goes much further than that. There's one instance where Minister Pravin Gordhan is told that for a particular board appointment, there are 12 vacancies. He can go ahead and fill 6. The Deployment Committee will fill the other 6. These are clear violations of that bright line of separation between party and state. And it is exactly our case that a proper understanding of the minutes, not of conjecture, not of speculation, but of the minutes and of the records that we have in our possession and that we put before the court. These particular minutes were before the court, the ones that were serving at the Zondo Commission as well, that is more than ample evidence to actually demonstrate it goes well beyond influence and amounts to direct interference. I think those are the two I'm covering. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think that the problem as well with the judgment is that it creates an imaginary line between the interference of the party and the state. But as we've seen from these minutes, those lines definitely don't exist. To the allegations made by a former disgruntled member of the party, I would just simply say this, that since his announcement, Mayors Papas, former Mayor Trollip, and a variety of other mayors in the party have come out to completely refute what he has said. The DA has never interfered and selected municipal managers or senior municipal managers in any municipality ever. And there are no minutes that would record that, because those deliberations and considerations did never take place. The sole thing that the mayors were required to produce was to indicate the process that was followed. And as I said, this is precisely to avoid a situation where a mayor or a mayor in a potential coalition could end up with a Floyd Brink or somebody like that being punted for a senior municipal position, and to make sure that whatever process was followed was a fair, open and transparent process, and that the candidate ultimately selected was the best person for the job. We've never asked for the political affiliations of municipal managers or any other senior staff in any municipality where we are at. Such would be a violation of the Public Service Act, but it would also be a violation of the very, very principles which we believe have underpinned our ability to produce a government that produces clean, accountable governance across all government departments, that spends money on the people and not the politicians, and which gets the basics of service delivery absolutely right. It is impermissible for any municipal manager to be a senior member of any political party. So I think that answers that question. If people are members of political parties, that is their prerogative, and they're entitled, as the Constitution permits them, to be supporters of political parties. Was the ANC foolish? No, I don't think this is an act of omission. I think this is a malignant act of commission, where clearly people were chosen based purely on their loyalty to the party and not on their ability to get the job done and not on their skill set. So I don't believe it was foolish. I believe it was a determined practice to do it. But I also think that you make a mistake if you focus on the person and not the process. Cadre deployment is about the process. And where people are selected after a fair, open and transparent process in which they've emerged as the best candidate, that is not cadre deployment. Cadre deployment is manipulating the process from the beginning to match the personality. So yes, you will find individuals who have left politics and have gone on to fulfill roles in various governments and other places. But what you got to go back and look at what the process to select them was. Was it an advertisement that was fairly placed? Was everybody given a fair opportunity to apply for that job? Was there a fair, open and transparent interview process that where the candidate had not been predetermined, as we've seen from the minutes, where candidates were chosen and then the adverts went out? That is cadre deployment. Employing skilled people who have the requisite qualifications and expertise and experience to fill a position is not cadre deployment. Cadre deployment, remember, focuses on the process, not necessarily on the on that. I notice as well that our friends at the Daily Maverick have been tweeting, and let me give you by way of example, Mr. Vusi Magwebu, who they're now trying to portray as someone who's been cadre deployed to be the ombudsman in the city of Cape Town. Let me give you a little bit about Mr. Magwebu's background, if I may, because I think it is very important. Before he became an MP in Parliament, he worked for the Social Security Agency in the Eastern Cape as a provincial manager for fraud management and compliance. Before working for SASSA, he worked for the audit firm Sizwe Insaluba Gobodo, SNG, as a forensic manager. Before joining them, he was a senior investigator at the Office of the Public Protector for 8 years, and before that, worked at the Independent Complaints Directorate as an assistant manager, complaint registry and monitoring. Before joining them, he was a public prosecutor for 8 years in various courts of law in the Eastern Cape. When he left Parliament, he didn't go straight to the city of Cape Town to be employed or deployed, as some in some of the media aspects are trying to portray. In fact, he went on and joined the board of the CCMA, which the DA has no power over the appointment. The ombudsman person became vacant, and based on a skill set and qualifications, not on a previous party affiliation, he was selected to be the ombudsperson of the city of Cape Town. And I don't think that anybody looking at this record can possibly argue that he was not the most suitably qualified person for the job. And had he not been, I have no doubt there would have been a labour law outcry over this and a legal challenge to his appointment. This was a merit-based appointment. And again, go back and look not at the individual, but look at the process. This is not somebody whose name appeared on some secret WhatsApp group. This is not somebody whose name was at the top of a database of loyal cadres of the movement who are awaiting deployment when positions come up. This is not somebody who relied on party membership to be able to be moved to the top of the pile to the exclusion of others. And so I think we need to be very, very careful that you don't fall into the trap that the ANC is trying to set here to try and bait and switch around these particular issues. The same applies with respect to Mr. Tim Harris. He applied for a position. He was selected for that position after an extensive interview process, the process which was open, fair and transparent, and which included independent people on that particular panel that came up with the decision that he would be the best person to fill that vacancy. Again, a process. Not somebody who's appeared on a list, not somebody whose redacted name is on a WhatsApp group, somebody, a process. And I think that's what you need to look at if you're going to get to the heart of the cadre deployment scourge in the country. And I would also say, if we're going to start also now dealing with this category of people, well, then the ANC are going to open up a whole Pandora's box for themselves. Because we know, for instance, that the Chief of Staff in Paul Mashatile's office, who's currently on full pay suspension for sexual harassment claims, fell into this category. So if the ANC wants to start throwing stones and trying to create an immoral equivocation or equivalence between non-political public servants and lawful political appointments, it's a game that's not going to end well for them. Thank you.
Thank you, John and Leon. And I believe we have covered the questions that were posed. And sorry?
There's a follow-up.
Oh, is there a follow-up? Go ahead, sir.
Hi, thanks. My name is Mulelani from SABC. I think the question that was raised by Jan has not been answered. The framework that you use as the DA, will you make those minutes available to the public?
Okay.
Is that all?
Yes.
Sorry, it's Jan Schreiber again. Do you believe that this issue, the issue of cadre deployment, will move the needle in the elections? Is this something that a mass of voters care about?
Okay.
Thanks. Also, like, do they draw the line between cadre deployment and service delivery?
Okay.
Hi, Babalo here from Eyewitness News. Just following up on what John said about, people going through the selecting the people that are qualified for positions. Is there any case where deployment gets it right and finds the best candidate? And does the DA have an issue with a person, the best candidate, going through the deployment process and being selected ultimately, and they happen to be the best candidate? Is that an issue as well for the party?
Okay. Thanks. I just want to remind media that we will have one-on-ones after this if you want that. But please take these questions. Leon?
Thanks, Babalo. I'll just take yours again on whether it can get it right. As the old saying goes, a broken clock can also be right twice a day. And I think that your question is actually very important because it goes back to the distinction between the individual and the process. So the point is there can be bad actors anywhere. We all know that even sometimes you can have a good appointment process and you end up with a bad person. It can happen. And the converse also is that people can be good people. We're not saying that everyone is a bad person. We are saying that the system, the process is fundamentally rotten. And the question about service delivery links to this. So I think we have a situation in South Africa where we can say with some confidence that it's not a case of isolated individuals or institutions that are failing, but that we have a systemic failure across the board. You cannot have load shedding, water shedding, ports failing, railways failing, pothole riddled roads, all of those things, unless there is a systemic problem. So if you have a systemic problem, then there must be a systemic cause for that. And we have very clearly identified cadre deployment, and actually a point that hasn't been raised today is that cadre deployment is not limited to national government in terms of the ANC's own policy. There are 9 cadre deployment committees across the provinces, and there's reference to regional deployment committees as well at local municipal sphere. So I can say to you now that we are going to extend that fight. This is not something that dies at national government level. This is something that permeates throughout the state. So when you poison the well of the process, then 1 or 2 people may survive the poison. But what you end up with is undrinkable water and a broken system. That's what cadre deployment has bequeathed us. And I think it re-emphasizes that we must look not at the individuals, not necessarily at the people. Of course, if they are corrupt, they must be held accountable individually. But what we need to fix is the system and reform it so that we can separate party from state for all political parties. This is the great irony in this whole attempt at bait and switch from the ANC, is that if there's an issue, if the ANC has an issue with cadre deployment, why didn't they support the End Cadre Deployment Bill? It was in front of them in Parliament. They were the only party that objected and blocked that bill from going into law. So let's then go and reform the state. Let's have transparent, fair, merit-based processes where any person from any party, from any background goes and applies, and you have a fair process with a fair outcome. It does not make sense that we would poison our own wells constantly by interfering and allowing this kind of interference. I will end off by saying I don't think that many South Africans would accept the idea, frankly, of Bafana Bafana or the Springboks or whoever being chosen by the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee. I think there would be an outcry. Can you imagine that? Why do we accept it when it comes to electricity? Why do we accept it when it comes to railways? Why do we accept it when it comes to the water we have to drink to survive? That is the fight that we are waging. Thank you, Babala.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to re-emphasize the point Leon has made, and that is if the ANC is so convinced in their myth that the DA is practicing, for which there are no minutes because we've never practiced cadre deployment, then they must support the bill or table their own bill to end cadre deployment. But for goodness sake, let's just do something to end this before it collapses the ability of the state to get even basic things right, because nobody, I believe, wherever they may be in South Africa, can accept that this is the situation. Jan, you ask a very, very good question, and that is that, do I think this is going to be a matter in the election? I absolutely think it is, because I think that South Africans are starting to join the dots. They're starting to join the dots about why they've lost their job at a factory that can't keep open because of load shedding. They are starting to join the dots about why the fact that their taps are running dry at home. They're starting to join the dots why they have an ineffective, inefficient police service that keeps them safe in their homes. They're starting to join the dots why their children are getting a substandard education where 82% of grade 4 learners can no longer read for meaning. They're starting to join the dots why the cost of living is going through the roof, and that is because the state's ability to do these things has been so fundamentally hollowed out by cadre deployment that these government departments cannot do their job. We've got an electricity generator and supplier that can neither generate nor supply electricity. We've got a state airline that can barely keep in the air. We've got state mining companies that cannot mine. We've got ports and harbours that cannot import or export goods out of it. And all of that can be traced back to cadre deployment. And the big dot that is going to be joined, I believe, in this election is the fact that state capture, which Judge Zondo has done an excellent job exposing, would not have been able to take place had it not been enabled by cadre deployment. Because you had to put the cadres into the positions before you could then capture the state. So when the government talks about fighting state capture and fighting corruption, it is a hollow promise, because unless you pull out the root cause of the problem, die wortel van die kwaad, if you don't pull that out of the ground, state capture will happen again, just with a set of new actors. So let's get this legislation out there. Let's stop pretending that this is a victimless crime. The victims are the 30 million people trapped in poverty. The victims are people who live in insecurity. The victims are people who are struggling to put food on the table. And I think those are the election issues. And we're going to, if voters have not started to join the dots, Jan, in this election, we're going to be joining the dots for them. Because every single calamity and crisis that we face can be traced back to state capture, the genesis of which was the original sin of cadre deployment. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, there would be opportunity for one-on-one interviews as we have now come to the end of this media briefing. I want to thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Cadre deployment is at the root of corruption and state capture in this country.
It has institutionalized criminal elements.
It's become one big criminal syndicate and racket and protection operation.
It is a racketeering and organized crime operation.
It is a recipe for disaster. It is almost putting the fox in charge of the chicken house.
The ANC is the biggest beneficiary of cadre deployment corruption.
How was it possible for these criminals to be appointed to positions of such power in the first place?
It's one of the biggest criminal stitch-ups in the history of South Africa.
It's impossible for anybody in the ANC to say they didn't know this was happening.
They knew what was going on, and they chose to do nothing.